What happens when the largest consumer of pork on Earth suddenly decides to cut ties with its biggest supplier? And who's ready to swoop in and take over the market? This is one of the most surprising shifts in global trade. Russia just replaced the EU in China's pork market. How did it happen? And what does it mean for the global economy? When we think about global trade and its most important commodities, pork might not be the first thing that comes to mind. Yet, in China, pork is more than just a food. It's a cultural cornerstone. With over 1.4 billion people, China consumes about half of the world's pork. In fact, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, USDA, China consumed over 55 million tons of pork in 2023 alone. That's more than the next 10 largest pork-consuming countries combined. So, why pork? Historically, pork has been the most accessible and affordable protein in China. Pork-based dishes like dumplings and roasted pork are embedded in Chinese cuisine and traditions. A rise in income over the last few decades has also increased demand. As a result, China has become not only the world's largest consumer, but also the largest importer of pork. To understand just how lucrative China's pork market is, let's look at the numbers. In 2023, China's pork imports were valued at an astounding $8.3 billion. For countries like Spain, Denmark, and Brazil, which export pork to China, this represents a huge slice of their export revenues. But it's not just about money. It's also about influence. Being a top pork supplier to China means more than just a trade relationship. It's a foothold in the largest consumer market in the world. For many countries, gaining access to China's pork market is like winning the jackpot. But China's pork market has also become a battleground for international suppliers because of its sheer size and competitiveness. A place at the top of China's import list means prestige and market dominance. This is why countries from across the globe are fiercely competing to become the preferred pork supplier, especially as China diversifies its imports to mitigate risks. If you are enjoying our content, please hit the like button. To help us even more, please leave your thoughts and feedback in the comments. Your engagement helps us grow. Thank you. Historically, the European Union has been the dominant force in China's pork import market. Between 2016 and 2021, the EU supplied about 70% of China's pork imports, with Spain and Denmark leading the charge. But how did the EU come to dominate this lucrative market? It comes down to a few factors. First, European pork producers, particularly in Spain, had a significant advantage in terms of production capacity and quality. Spanish pork is known for its high quality, which appeals to Chinese consumers who are increasingly looking for premium meat products. Additionally, the EU and China have had stable trade relations for many years, with European pork benefiting from lower tariffs compared to other exporters. Spain alone exported over 1 million tons of pork to China in 2020, with Denmark not far behind. These two countries have long been the pillars of EU pork exports, accounting for more than half of the EU's total pork exports to China. Trade tensions between China and the European Union took a sharp turn recently, and it wasn't just about pork. It all began with disputes over electric vehicles. In 2023, the EU imposed tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, accusing China of undercutting European manufacturers with government subsidies. China, in response, retaliated by launching investigations into European pork producers, accusing them of dumping pork at below-market prices to unfairly dominate the Chinese market. This escalated quickly. With new tariffs and increased scrutiny on EU pork, European exporters began to feel the heat. According to a report by Bloomberg, EU pork exports to China fell by nearly 20% in the first half of 2024. Spanish and Danish pork producers were hit especially hard, with exports dropping by a staggering 30%. The geopolitical conflict over electric vehicles has spilled into other industries, and pork is one of the casualties. These tensions have significantly disrupted the once flourishing trade relationship between China and the EU. leaving a massive gap in the pork market that other countries are eager to fill. China's retaliation against the EU's tariffs on electric vehicles wasn't limited to just investigations. In addition to launching anti-dumping investigations into European pork, China also reduced its import quotas from the EU. This meant that European pork producers suddenly had fewer opportunities to sell their products in the Chinese market, despite having the infrastructure to meet the demand. Spain and Denmark, which had relied heavily on the Chinese market, saw their export volumes shrink dramatically. This had a domino effect on the entire supply chain. From pork farmers to processing plants, the industry faced job cuts, plant closures, and massive losses. According to a report by Reuters, Spanish pork exports to China dropped by 35% in the second quarter of 2024, with Denmark suffering a 28% decline. The consequences of China's anti-dumping investigations have been devastating for EU pork producers, particularly in Spain and Denmark. The investigations accused European producers of flooding the Chinese market with pork at artificially low prices, which was seen as an unfair trade practice. As a result, many shipments were delayed or rejected outright, leading to significant financial losses. In Spain, pork producers reported losses of up to 500 million euros in 2024, according to data from the Spanish Pork Producers Association. Similarly, Denmark's pork industry is projected to lose 350 million euros by the end of the year. This has created a crisis for European farmers, who now face the challenge of finding alternative markets or significantly scaling back production. In response to the growing trade tensions with the European Union, China has been actively diversifying its pork import sources. Countries like the United States and Brazil have seized this opportunity, expanding their market share in China. The United States saw its pork exports to China grow by 15% in 2023, according to the USDA, while Brazil's pork exports surged by 25%. These countries have benefited from the vacuum left by the EU, with American and Brazilian pork producers stepping in to fill the gap. But the biggest winner in this geopolitical shuffle has been Russia. Once a minor player in the global pork market, Russia has rapidly expanded its pork exports to China, taking full advantage of the EU's struggles. According to official reports, Russia's pork exports to China increased by 40% in 2023 alone. Russia's long-term goal is clear: to become China's primary pork supplier, overtaking the EU for good. Russian officials have been actively negotiating trade deals with China, offering competitive prices and favorable terms. And with growing political alignment between Moscow and Beijing, it seems that Russia is positioning itself to dominate the market. Russia's rise as a major pork supplier to China is no accident. It's the result of careful planning and strategic moves. First, Russia has invested heavily in modernizing its pork production facilities. Over the past decade, Russia has poured billions into its agricultural sector, with pork production growing by 29% between 2018 and 2023. According to the Russian Ministry of Agriculture. This modernization has allowed Russia to meet China's stringent quality and safety standards, giving them a crucial edge. Second, Russia has been able to offer China lower prices than its European competitors, thanks to lower production costs and favorable trade agreements. Unlike the EU, which has been embroiled in trade disputes with China, Russia has enjoyed a stable and growing relationship with Beijing. This political alignment has translated into smoother trade negotiations, with Russian pork exports benefiting from reduced tariffs and simplified import procedures. Russia's ability to offer competitive pricing, coupled with strong political ties, has given them a distinct advantage over the EU. Finally, Russia has positioned itself as a reliable and long-term partner for China. In contrast to the EU, which has seen its pork exports decline due to ongoing trade tensions, Russia has been able to guarantee a steady and consistent supply of pork. This reliability has made Russia an increasingly attractive option for Chinese buyers who want to avoid the unpredictability of the EU market. In 2024, Russia surpassed the EU to become China's second largest pork supplier, trailing only Brazil. But Russia has its sights set on becoming number one, and they're closing in fast. With the EU struggling to recover from trade sanctions, it's possible that Russia could overtake Brazil as well, becoming China's dominant pork supplier in the near future. As Russia and other competitors gain ground in China, the European Union's pork industry is facing an existential crisis. The sudden decline in Chinese demand for EU pork has sent shockwaves through domestic industries in Spain, Denmark, and France, countries that were once the backbone of European pork exports. In Spain, where pork production accounts for 14% of total agricultural output, the impact has been severe. According to Spain's Ministry of Agriculture, the country's pork industry has already lost 800 million euros in revenue due to declining exports to China. Many farmers have been forced to cut back on production or shutter their operations entirely. A report from El País highlights how rural communities dependent on pork production are seeing a rise in unemployment and economic instability. In Denmark, the story is similar. Danish pork exports to China, which were once a crucial pillar of the country's agricultural economy, have declined by 35% in 2024 alone. This has led to factory closures and layoffs, with the Danish Agriculture and Food Council warning that further job cuts could be on the horizon. For many Danish farmers, the situation is dire, and finding alternative markets has proven challenging. The decline in Chinese demand has hit us like a tidal wave. We're scrambling to adapt, but the future looks uncertain, says Lars Andersen, a Danish pork farmer. Even in France, which is a smaller player in the European pork export market, the effects are being felt. French pork producers have seen a 20% drop in exports to China, and the industry is bracing for further losses. French farmers are now calling on the government to negotiate new trade deals and provide financial support to help them weather the storm. Across Europe, the pork industry is grappling with the harsh reality that its dominant position in the global market may be slipping away. If the EU continues to lose market share in China's pork industry, the long-term consequences could be far-reaching. Economically, the loss of the Chinese market would force European producers to either scale back production or find alternative markets. A daunting task given the size and importance of China's demand. According to Rabobank, a leading financial institution specializing in global food and agriculture, the EU could see its pork export revenues decline by up to 1.5 billion euros annually if it fails to regain its foothold in China. But the economic impact goes beyond just pork. The decline in exports could ripple across the entire supply chain, affecting feed suppliers, transport companies, and even local governments that rely on tax revenues from the pork industry. In Spain, where pork exports account for a significant portion of the agricultural economy, the loss of Chinese demand could lead to widespread job losses, particularly in rural areas. Politically, the EU's loss of market share in China could weaken its negotiating power in future trade discussions. As China turns to other suppliers like Russia, Brazil, and the United States, the EU risks being sidelined in one of the world's most important markets. This could have broader implications for the EU's influence on the global stage, as its ability to shape trade policies and secure favorable terms diminishes. The EU is facing a critical juncture. If it cannot regain its position in China's pork market, the consequences will be felt across the entire agricultural sector, according to Maria Sanchez, a trade policy expert. In the long term, losing significant market share in China could lead to a restructuring of the EU's pork industry. Producers may need to shift their focus to other markets, such as Southeast Asia or the Middle East. But these markets are smaller and less lucrative than China. This could lead to consolidation within the industry, with smaller producers being forced out of business, leaving only the largest players standing. Despite the challenges, all hope is not lost for the European Union. There are still paths to regaining its competitive edge in China's pork market, though they won't be easy. First and foremost, the EU will need to address the ongoing trade tensions with China. This means resolving the dispute over electric vehicles and finding a way to lift the anti-dumping investigations that have crippled pork exports. In addition to resolving trade disputes, the EU will need to invest in improving the quality and safety of its pork exports. Chinese consumers are increasingly concerned about food safety, and the EU can leverage its reputation for producing high-quality, safe pork to win back market share. By focusing on premium products and niche markets, European producers could differentiate themselves from competitors like Russia and Brazil, which are more focused on volume. The EU has a unique opportunity to market itself as a premium supplier of pork to China. If it can focus on quality and safety, it can regain its competitive edge, claimed Anna Muller, an agricultural market analyst. Another potential avenue for the EU is to explore partnerships with Chinese companies. By collaborating with Chinese distributors and retailers, European pork producers could gain better access to the market and strengthen their relationships with Chinese buyers. This would require a shift in strategy, focusing on building long-term partnerships rather than relying solely on trade agreements. Finally, the EU could look to diversify its own markets. While China is the largest pork consumer in the world, there are other emerging markets in Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Africa that are growing rapidly. By expanding into these markets, European producers could reduce their reliance on China and create a more stable, diversified export base. As the dust settles, one thing is clear. The global pork market has been transformed. Russia has taken the place of the EU, and the balance of power has shifted. How long this new dynamic will last remains to be seen, but one thing's for sure. It's a whole new world for global trade. We hope you're enjoying this video. We're thrilled to have you with us today. If our content struck a chord or sparked some inspiration, go ahead and smash that like button and hit subscribe to join our awesome community. Please share this video to help us grow. Your support is super valuable. Check out another video from our channel, which is now on the screen.